12 years ago, a 10-year-old boy named Miguel Martinez left his family home to pick up a pizza just 3 blocks away. It was a routine errand he'd done many times before, a simple Friday night tradition in a quiet suburban neighborhood. But Miguel never returned home, vanishing without a trace despite extensive searches, nationwide alerts, and years of tireless investigation. Authorities suspected abduction, but with no ransom demands, no body, and no witnesses who saw anything suspicious, the case eventually went cold. While most people accepted the tragic likelihood that Miguel was gone forever, his family never stopped searching, especially his mother, who insisted her son was still alive somewhere. Then on the 12th anniversary of his disappearance, a detective knocked on their door with evidence that would finally reveal the shocking truth about what happened that night, and lead to a reunion no one thought possible. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today. The evening sunlight filtered through the half-drawn curtains of the Martinez family living room, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. Maria Martinez adjusted the framed photograph on the mantel, her fingers lingering on the smiling face of her son Miguel, frozen in time, at age 10. It had been 12 years since that Friday evening, when he'd gone to pick up pizza from Romano's Pizzeria 3 blocks away, and never returned when an ordinary errand became the defining tragedy of their lives. In the kitchen, Lucia Martinez, now 25, prepared tea without waiting for an answer from her mother. This ritual of gathering on the anniversary had become their way of coping, their way of keeping Miguel's memory alive in a household that had learned to function around his absence, the emptiness where he should have been a presence as tangible as furniture. Miguel's case had generated national headlines when it first happened. Search teams combed the neighborhood. Witnesses reported seeing a boy matching his description near the pizzeria. Security cameras captured blurry footage of him entering the establishment and leaving with a large pizza box, but then nothing, as if he had simply vanished into the warm evening air. Investigators initially suspected a stranger abduction, but with no ransom demands, no body found, and no physical evidence, the case eventually went cold. Despite the family's tireless advocacy, despite billboards with Miguel's face, despite age progression photos released every few years, the Martinez family had been left with nothing but questions and theories that led nowhere. Diego Martinez checked his phone absently. At 19, he had grown tall and broad-shouldered, with the same cleft in his chin that Miguel had inherited from their father. He had been only 7 when his brother vanished, barely old enough to understand what was happening. He had grown up in the shadow of absence, learning to navigate a household defined by loss. Carlos Martinez arrived home, his tie loosened, briefcase in hand. At 50, his hair had grayed at the temples, lines of grief and worry permanently etched around his eyes. He had never stopped searching, never stopped checking missing persons forums and cold case websites, even as the active investigation dwindled to occasional reviews when similar cases emerged. The family gathered around the dining table, set for 5, though only 4 would eat, the empty chair at the head of the table, a silent acknowledgement of the one who was missing. They had just begun to serve the food when the doorbell rang, an unexpected intrusion on their private memorial. "It's Detective Ramirez," Carlos called from the door, his voice strained with sudden tension. "He wants to speak with all of us." Detective Luis Ramirez had been the lead investigator when Miguel disappeared. In the early years, he'd been a regular presence in their lives, but as the case went cold, his visits had become less frequent, until they saw him only when a rare lead emerged, inevitably leading nowhere. His presence tonight, on the anniversary, could only mean something significant had happened. "I'm sorry to intrude," Detective Ramirez said as he entered, declining Carlos's offer to sit. "But this couldn't wait." The Martinez family gathered around him, their dinner forgotten, as he pulled out a manila folder marked with the case number that had become as familiar to them as their own birthdays. "We've had a breakthrough," he began, his professional demeanor barely containing an unusual energy. Police in Sacramento arrested a man named Robert Winters. During the arrest, officers discovered items in his home that raised suspicions. Among them was a baseball card collection that matched the description of the one Miguel had with him when he disappeared, along with a school ID card bearing Miguel's name. "That could be coincidence," Diego said, his voice betraying hope despite his attempt at skepticism. "It could be," Ramirez acknowledged, "but there's more. Winters lived in this neighborhood 12 years ago under the name Thomas Grant. He worked as a substitute teacher at Miguel's elementary school and moved away approximately 1 month after Miguel disappeared. The details snapped into focus, pieces of a puzzle finally taking shape. Thomas Grant. Maria repeated the name, her brow furrowing. I remember him. He attended a few of the early searches for Miguel. He seemed so concerned, so helpful. Winters has a son named Michael, Ramirez continued. Records show this son only appeared after Winters moved to Sacramento. There are no birth certificates, no school records before that time. DNA testing is underway, but we have reason to believe this Michael Winters is actually Miguel. The room went silent, the possibility too enormous to absorb immediately. Winters lost his own 10-year-old son in a drowning accident 3 months before Miguel disappeared, Ramirez explained. Evidence suggests he suffered a psychological break following this tragedy. In his delusional state, he appears to have convinced himself that certain parents, including you, were neglectful by letting your child walk to the pizzeria alone. Is he alive? Maria asked, the question that mattered above all others, her voice barely audible. We believe so, Ramirez confirmed, and we've located him. The revelation sent shockwaves through the room, shock, disbelief, cautious hope, all reflected on the faces of a family who had lived in limbo for more than a decade. Michael Winters is currently a junior at Sacramento State, studying engineering. Based on our investigation, Winters systematically convinced Miguel that his family had abandoned him, using manipulated news stories and forged letters to reinforce this narrative over time. How? Lucia demanded, her voice breaking. How could anyone believe such lies? He was 10, Ramirez said gently. Taken by someone he likely recognized and trusted from school. And in the early days, he may have been sedated or otherwise manipulated. Based on prescriptions we found in Winters' name, we believe he worked methodically to erase Miguel's memories of his real family and replace them with a fabricated reality in which he was Winters' son. Carlos gripped the back of a chair, his knuckles white. Does he know? Has anyone told him? Not yet, Ramirez responded. We've been observing him, establishing a plan for how to approach this delicately. He's an adult now, with a life he believes is his own. Learning the truth will be traumatic. We wanted you to be involved in that process. When? Maria asked, the simple question containing all her hope and fear and determination. Tomorrow, Ramirez said. We can bring you to Sacramento tonight. We have officers ready to make contact with him in the morning. This type of reunification requires careful handling. He's about to learn his entire life has been built on lies. The Martinez family moved as one, gathering essential items, preparing for a journey they had imagined countless times over 12 years, but never truly believed would happen. Carlos made calls to employers and relatives. Maria packed the small album of family photos she had kept by her bedside all these years. Lucia researched psychological impacts of reunification on her phone, while Diego stood silently by the front door, keys in hand, ready to drive them anywhere necessary. The drive to Sacramento stretched before them like the final miles of a marathon they had been running for 12 years, a journey measured not in distance, but in heartbeats, in breaths, in moments of hope, extinguished and rekindled, a family moving toward completion after years of fracture, toward answers after more than a decade of questions. What would Miguel remember? What would he believe? What person had he become under the influence of the man who stole him? These questions hung in the air unspoken as they drove north through the darkness toward the reunion that would either heal their family or reveal new wounds they could never have anticipated. When they arrived at the Sacramento police station, the reality of what was happening finally began to sink in. This building contained their son, their brother, the missing piece that had defined their family by its absence for 12 years. Detective Ramirez met them in a private room, explaining the approach they had developed with psychologists specialized in trauma and recovery. He doesn't know you're here yet, Ramirez explained. Officers made contact with him this morning, asking him to come in regarding information about his background. He agreed to come voluntarily, which is a positive sign. We've explained that we've discovered discrepancies in his documentation and asked for a DNA sample, which he provided. Does he look like the photo? Maria asked, her voice stronger now. Ramirez nodded. He does, though seeing him in person, you'll notice more familiar traits, the way he moves, his expressions. They're subtle, but they're there. An officer appeared at the door with news that changed everything. "He's asking questions, sir. He seems to have suspicions about what's really going on. He's requesting information about Robert Winters' arrest." "Bring him in," Ramirez decided after a brief consultation with a psychologist who had been standing by. "This may not be the gradual introduction we planned, but if he's already suspicious, it might be better to proceed directly." The Martinez family stood frozen as footsteps approached the door, Carlos's arm around Maria's shoulders, Lucia and Diego flanking them like sentinels. The door opened and a young man stood in the threshold, tall, with the same dark eyes and cleft chin that Carlos and Diego shared, his expression guarded, suspicious, yet underneath it all, somehow familiar. For a moment no one spoke, the weight of 12 years of absence filling the space between them. Then Maria took a small step forward. "Miguel," she said, then quickly corrected herself. "Michael, I'm Maria. This is Carlos, Lucia, and Diego." The young man's eyes moved from face to face, searching for something, recognition perhaps, or confirmation of a truth he had always suspected but never acknowledged. "We're your family," Carlos said simply. "I know," Michael replied, his voice deeper than they'd imagined, but with a cadence that echoed through Maria's memory. "I figured it out when they started asking about my background, about Robert. I've always had these, dreams about another house, another family. I thought they were just dreams." His eyes locked with Maria's. "I remember you singing in Spanish while cooking. I remember a blue house with a treehouse in the backyard. I remember falling off my bike and getting stitches in my knee." The distance between them collapsed as Maria moved forward, embracing her son for the first time in 12 years. After a moment's hesitation, his arms came up to return the embrace, the circle broken 12 years ago beginning to close again. The reunion that followed was neither simple nor easy. Michael had built a life based on lies, but it was still his life. He had friends, classes, a girlfriend, people who knew him as Michael Winters. Reconciling his past with his present would take time, therapy, careful rebuilding of trust and memories. But as the Martinez family drove home several days later, with the promise of regular visits and a plan for gradual reintegration, they carried with them something they had lost 12 years ago when a boy went to pick up pizza and never returned. They carried hope, not the desperate, clinging hope of the searching years, but something stronger, more substantial, the certainty that despite everything that had been taken from them, despite the time lost and the pain endured, they had found their way back to each other, the truth finally revealed after 12 long years. If you found this story as compelling as we did, make sure to follow for more remarkable reunions and resolved mysteries that defy the odds. Every share brings hope to another family still waiting for answers in the darkness.